That locket! The voice of Alastair Finch, usually a resonant instrument of command, was now a choked, ragged whisper that seemed alien even to himself. The $70 million G700 jet, humming with the vibrant life Elijah Hayes had just painstakingly restored to it, might as well have vanished into thin air. Finch's meticulously ordered universe had violently contracted, narrowing to a single blinding point, the dusty, tarnished silver locket nestled against the young black boy's work shirt. Alastair Finch, a man who prided himself on unshakable composure, stood frozen. His face, moments before displaying the cool assessment of a satisfied client, was now a mask of raw, uncomprehending shock. The blood drained from his features as if he'd seen a ghost from a half-forgotten, deeply buried nightmare. His eyes wide and suddenly haunted, burned into the unassuming piece of metal, where Finch finally forced out each word, laden with a lifetime of unspoken pain. His gaze never leaving the locket, did you get? That Alastair Finch's desperate question hangs heavy in the air, a prelude to a forgotten past about to explode into the present. What unspeakable secrets does that dusty old locket hold? If you want to uncover the truth alongside Elijah, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single revelation, and we'd love to hear your initial theories and feelings in the comments below. This story is just getting started. The biting chill of the early November morning did little to deter Elijah Hayes. At 17, an age when most of his peers were preoccupied with fleeting digital trends or the languid comforts of a weekend lie-in, Elijah found a different kind of solace, a different kind of challenge, within the echoing vastness of Hangar 3 at Westfield Executive Airfield. His breath misted in the cold air, mingling with the scent of jet fuel and hard-working metal. He moved with a quiet grace, his lanky frame often clad in coveralls, a size too big navigating the organized chaos of tools and machinery with an innate understanding that belied his years. Elijah's world was one of grit and gears, a stark contrast to the polished affluence that Hangar 3 usually served. He was the kid from the other side of the tracks, the one whose future, by most societal metrics, was supposed to be as grey and unyielding as the industrial district he called home. His mother worked 2 jobs, her smiles tired, but always present her dreams for him, a silent prayer, whispered into the pre-dawn light. His own dreams were more tangible, forged in the intricate beauty of engines and the elegant physics of flight. He didn't just see machines, he heard their silent conversations, understood their delicate balances. Around his neck, tucked beneath the worn collar of his work shirt, lay a small, unassuming locket. It was old, the silver tarnished to a soft pewter, its surface smooth from years of unconscious touch. A dusty old locket, some might call it. It had been his mother's and her mother's before, that the only tangible link to a grandfather he'd never known, a man whose stories were lost to time, much like the intricate details of the locket's almost invisible floral etching. It wasn't valuable, not in the way the world measured worth. But to Elijah, it was an anchor, a quiet hum of connection in a life that often felt adrift. He'd touch it sometimes, a fleeting subconscious gesture when faced with a particularly stubborn bolt or a baffling schematic. His good luck charm, though luck he knew, was mostly just preparation, meeting a sliver of opportunity. Today that sliver was almost non-existent. The G700 Mr. Alastair Finch's $70 million flagship sat like a wounded titan in the center of the hangar. It was a marvel of aerospace engineering, grounded by an electrical gremlin that had eluded the airfield's most seasoned avionics technicians for the past 18 excruciating hours. Panic thick and cloying was beginning to permeate the usually crisp professional air. Mr. Finch himself was due to arrive from an overseas summit in less than 6 hours, and the jet, his chariot, his airborne office, was stubbornly, resolutely dead in the water. Or rather, dead on the tarmac. Elijah had watched from the periphery, his official task being to fetch tools and run diagnostics on lesser aircraft. He'd heard the frustrated sighs, the increasingly sharp exchanges between the lead engineers. He'd seen the schematics spread out like ancient scrolls pored over by men with decades of experience, their faces etched with a mixture of fatigue and bafflement. And as he watched, as he listened, a different picture had begun to form in his mind, a pattern unseen by the others. He'd hesitantly approached Mr. Thompson, the hangar supervisor, a man whose usual demeanor was a tight coil of stress now wound to a near breaking point. Mr. Thompson, Sir Elijah had begun, his voice quiet but clear. Thompson, a man whose patience was currently measured in nanoseconds, barely glanced at him. "What is it, Hayes? Can't you see we're in the middle of a Category 5 meltdown here?" "Yes, sir. About the G700. I think the cascading failure isn't originating in the primary power distribution unit. I believe the fault might be a recursive error in the FADEX interface with the auxiliary fly-by-wire system, triggered by a microfracture in the shielded cabling leading to the portside engine nacelle. It wouldn't show up on standard diagnostics unless you were specifically looking for a harmonic distortion above 20 kilohertz. Thompson had stopped, actually stopped, and stared. Old man Henderson, a veteran mechanic who'd been grumbling about newfangled electronics all morning, let out a skeptical snort. "You sure you know which end of a wrench is which, son?" Henderson drawled, wiping grease from his hands. "This isn't some go-kart you're tinkering with. That's a $70 million bird." Elijah met Henderson's gaze, his own steady. "With all due respect, Mr. Henderson, a go-kart wouldn't be this quiet. And I've been studying the G700 supplementary service manuals for the past year, the ones from the German update." Thompson, seeing a desperate, almost foolish glimmer of hope, or perhaps just wanting to exhaust every conceivable option before facing Mr. Finch's wrath, had thrown his hands up. "Fine, go on, Hayes. What have we got to lose if you so much as scratch the paint, though it's your hide, not mine? You've got 2 hours, not a minute more." And so Elijah Hayes, the quiet boy with the gifted hands and the dusty old locket, was let loose on the crippled jet. He worked with a focused intensity that was almost hypnotic. His movements were precise, economical. He didn't fumble. He didn't guess. He moved like a surgeon, his tools extensions of his own sensitive fingertips. He traced wires that snaked like metallic veins through the aircraft's complex anatomy, his touch light, his ears occasionally cocked as if listening for something only he could hear. He found the almost invisible chafe in the shielded cable, just as he'd suspected, near a high-vibration mounting bracket. A meticulous repair, a system reboot sequence that deviated slightly from the standard protocol to bypass the corrupted error logs, and then the moment of truth. He powered up the primary systems. The hangar, which had been filled with the tense silence of a vigil, suddenly hummed with the reassuring thrum of perfectly calibrated machinery. Green lights blinked on across the cockpit, displays one after another like stars appearing in a clear night sky. Thompson, who had been watching with a mixture of terror and morbid curiosity, let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Well, I'll be," he whispered, staring at the console. The kid actually did it. Just then, the main hangar doors rumbled open, bathing the interior in the pale, watery light of the approaching dawn. Framed in the doorway, a silhouette that exuded an almost palpable aura of command, stood Mr. Alistair Finch. He was earlier than expected. His tailored suit seemed to absorb the dim light, his features sharp, his eyes, even from a distance, missing nothing. He was a man accustomed to things working to the world bending to his will. The delay, the potential disruption to his meticulously planned schedule would not have pleased him. He strode towards the jet, his PA, a nervous young woman, scurrying a few paces behind. Thompson Finch's voice was clipped, resonant. "Report. Is my aircraft ready, or am I spending the morning admiring your collection of expensive paperweights?" Thompson, suddenly finding his voice, gestured towards Elijah, who was wiping his hands on a rag, the old silver locket now visible against his dark shirt. "Mr. Finch, sir, good news. The issue has been resolved. All systems are green. We had an unexpected breakthrough." Finch's gaze swept over Thompson, then landed on Elijah. It was a look that could appraise a man's worth in a single dismissive glance. He took in the two large coveralls, the youthful face, the smudge of grease on one cheek. There was no surprise, no curiosity, just the faint, impatient arch of an eyebrow. "This breakthrough?" he inquired, his tone dry as desert sand. Elijah met his gaze respectfully. "Yes, sir. The fault was in a shielded cable leading to the port side FADEC. It's been repaired and the system recalibrated. She's ready to fly. Finch gave a curt nod, a small, almost imperceptible movement. He was about to turn away, perhaps, to issue further instructions to Thompson or his PA, his mind already on his next meeting, his next conquest. But then something caught his eye. Something small, something glinting softly in the hangar's stark light. The dusty old locket. Elijah, feeling the intensity of the sudden silence, unconsciously raised a hand towards it. Mr. Alistair Finch stopped. He didn't just pause. He froze, utterly, completely. His hand, halfway to adjusting his tie, remained suspended. The color drained from his face, leaving it a mask of shocked, almost horrified disbelief. His eyes, a moment before, coolly assessing, were now wide, fixed on the tarnished piece of silver around the boy's neck with an intensity that was terrifying. The air in the hangar crackled the earlier tension of a broken jet, replaced by something far deeper, far more personal, and infinitely more unsettling. When Mr. Finch finally spoke, his voice was a raw, strangled whisper, stripped of all its previous authority, a sound that seemed torn from a place of profound and buried pain. "That locket! Where in God's name did you get that locket?" The raw, fractured query from Alistair Finch hung in the frigid hangar air, a shard of glass amidst the metallic symphony of a cooling jet engine. Elijah Hayes, who had faced down complex machinery and the scorn of seasoned mechanics with quiet composure, found himself utterly disarmed by the raw, almost primal emotion radiating from the powerful man before him. Mr. Finch, CEO of Finch Global, a titan of industry whose name was synonymous with ruthless efficiency and an unshakable will, now looked broken. His usually sharp, calculating eyes were wide, vulnerable, and fixed on the tarnished silver locket with an expression of such profound, disbelieving agony that Elijah instinctively took a small step back. The locket." Sir Elijah stammered, his voice barely a whisper. He could feel the hangar supervisor Thompson and Mr. Henderson exchange bewildered, nervous glances behind Finch. This was a side of Alistair Finch none of them had ever witnessed a crack in the granite facade. Finch's gaze didn't waver. It was as if Elijah Thompson Henderson, the $70 million jet, none of it existed beyond that small piece of silver. "Yes, the locket." Finch repeated, his voice, hoarse, each word an effort. "Where did you get it? Who gave it to you? Speak, boy." The last words were sharper, a command born of desperation rather than authority, and they made Elijah flinch. He swallowed his hand, still near the locket, a protective gesture. It was my mother's, sir. She said it belonged to her mother. It's just an old family thing. He paused, then added with a touch of youthful literalness, "It's silver, I think, though probably not very valuable." The almost childlike observation seemed to momentarily pierce through Finch's turmoil. A flicker of something unreadable crossed the CEO's face. Was it pain, confusion, or the sheer incongruity of discussing monetary value when his world had just tilted on its axis? He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Images, unbidden and unwelcome, seared across the inside of his eyelids, a flash of sunlight on chestnut hair, the melodic lilt of a forgotten laugh, the cool, smooth feel of that very locket pressed into his palm on a summer evening, heavy with the scent of honeysuckle and unspoken promises. Isabel. Her name was a silent scream in the chambers of his mind, a ghost, he thought, long buried. He opened his eyes, the cool grey orbs now glistening with an unshed emotion. He seemed to be struggling for control, his powerful shoulders tensing. His PA, Miss Albright, a woman known for her unflappable efficiency, took a tentative step forward. "Mr. Finch, sir, are you all right?" "Perhaps some water," Finch waved a dismissive hand, never taking his eyes off Elijah and the locket. "No, I'm perfectly fine, Albright." His voice was strained, unnatural. He turned his head, slightly addressing Thompson, but still looking at Elijah. "Thompson, the quarterly reports for the Asian sector. I need them. Blue. Yes, blue. Make sure they're blue." Thompson blinked. "Blue, sir," he ventured, utterly confused. "The report covers, you mean?" "Yes, precisely," Finch snapped, then immediately seemed to regret his tone. He took a deep, shuddering breath, visibly reassembling himself, piece by piece, the formidable CEO persona, slowly, painstakingly being drawn back up like a fortress wall. When he spoke again, his voice was more measured, though a dangerous undercurrent still thrummed beneath the surface. "Hayes," he said the name, now carrying a new, unsettling weight. "You've done commendable work. Unexpected." He paused, his gaze still drawn to the locket. "Your skill is noteworthy." Elijah remained silent, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. This wasn't just about fixing a jet anymore. He could feel it. The air was thick with unsaid things, with a history that seemed to emanate from the very locket he wore. "As a token of my appreciation," Finch continued, the words sounding rehearsed, as if he were reading from a script he was simultaneously writing in his head, "I am offering you a position, a special apprenticeship, directly under the supervision of my personal engineering consultant. You'll have access to projects far exceeding your current responsibilities. A significant pay increase, naturally." Thompson's jaw practically hit the floor. Henderson looked as if he'd swallowed his wrench. An apprentice, a boy, catapulted into such a position, it was unheard of. Elijah, too, was stunned. This was beyond anything he could have imagined. But a warning bell, faint but insistent, chimed in the back of his mind. The offer felt too much, too sudden, and it was all tied somehow to Mr. Finch's laser-like focus on his locket. "Sir, I don't know what to say," Elijah managed. "That's incredibly generous." "Nonsense," Finch said, a touch of his old decisiveness, returning though his eyes still held that haunted quality. "Talent should be nurtured." He took another step closer, his voice dropping, becoming more personal, more intense. The facade was cracking again. "That locket, Hayes, it's unusual. The craftsmanship. I have an interest in antiquities." The lie was flimsy, even to Elijah's inexperienced ears. Finch reached out a hand, not to shake Elijah's, but as if he meant to touch the locket itself. He stopped himself just short, his fingers trembling slightly. The internal battle was evident. "I would like to examine it more closely," Mr. Finch stated, his voice now a low command that brooked no argument. "In my office. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock sharp. Bring it with you." He wasn't asking. The way he said "bring it with you" sent a chill down Elijah's spine. It wasn't just a request to see an object. It felt like a summons, as if the locket itself held a power over this man, a power Elijah was only just beginning to glimpse. Mr. Finch then turned abruptly, his composure mostly restored, and strode towards the hangar exit, Miss Albright, and a still flabbergasted Thompson trailing in his wake. And Thompson Finch called back over his shoulder, his voice once again, the familiar steel of command, "Ensure those report covers are the deepest shade of sapphire." Nothing less. Elijah Hayes stood alone beside the now perfectly functioning $70 million jet, the echo of Finch's strange command about report covers fading into the vastness of the hangar. He slowly raised his hand, his fingers closing around the worn, familiar shape of the dusty old locket. It felt different now, no longer just a simple keepsake, but a key. A key to a door he hadn't known existed, a door that had just been violently rattled by one of the most powerful men in the country. And he, Elijah Hayes, was apparently the one holding it. A profound and unsettling sense of foreboding washed over him, mixed with an undeniable, irresistible surge of curiosity. Tomorrow morning couldn't come soon enough. The elevator ascended with a silent, almost reverent whoosh, a stark contrast to the rumbling service lifts Elijah was accustomed to. When the doors whispered open on the penthouse floor home to Alistair Finch's private office, Elijah felt as though he'd stepped into another dimension. The air was different here, still cool and scented faintly with expensive leather and something else, something vaguely like old books. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the city, sprawling below a glittering, indifferent beast. The office itself was vast, a symphony of polished mahogany, chrome, and glass, each piece of minimalist furniture looking more like a museum exhibit than something used for daily work. Elijah's worn sneakers felt sacrilegious on the plush slate-grey carpet. He clutched the strap of his old backpack, the dusty silver locket nestled safely inside a small, soft cloth in his pocket. Mr. Finch was standing by the window, his back to the room, a solitary figure against the breathtaking cityscape. He didn't turn as Elijah was announced by a hushed, impeccably dressed assistant. "Leave us, Finch," commanded his voice, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the expensive silence. The assistant vanished as silently as she'd appeared. Finch turned, then his face etched with a weariness that hadn't been there the day before, or perhaps it had hidden beneath layers of command Elijah was only now beginning to see through. Today the CAO's formidable armor was visibly dented. Hayes, he acknowledged his gaze, flicking briefly to Elijah, before settling on a point somewhere over his shoulder. "Thank you for coming." His tone was formal, yet strained. "The item. You have it?" Elijah nodded, his throat suddenly dry. "Yes, sir." He carefully retrieved the locket, the tarnished silver cool against his palm. He held it out. Alistair Finch didn't take it immediately. He simply stared at it, resting in Elijah's young, calloused hand. It looked so small, so insignificant against the backdrop of this immense wealth and power. Yet it held this titan of a man captive. Finally, with a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly, Finch reached out and took the locket. His fingers, long and manicured, closed around it with a strange reverence, as if handling a sacred relic. He walked over to his massive desk, a gleaming expanse of dark wood that Elijah privately thought might be larger than his entire kitchen, and sat down heavily. He laid the locket on the polished surface, the tiny piece of silver, a stark focal point in the opulent room. He picked it up again, turning it over and over, his thumb tracing the faint, almost erased floral pattern Elijah had often idly wondered about. His expression was a maelstrom of emotions, sorrow, regret, a longing so profound it was almost painful to witness. This clasp, Finch murmured his voice, barely audible. It was always a little stiff. He fumbled with it, and for a moment Elijah saw not the powerful CEO, but an older, clumsier man lost in a memory. A new series of images, sharper this time, more insistent, flooded Finch's mind. A sun-dappled picnic, a checkered blanket spread beneath an ancient oak, laughter light and carefree echoing in the warm air. Her laughter, Isabel, her face framed by wind-tousled chestnut hair, her eyes the color of warm honey, alight with a joy so pure it could make the world stop. He remembered the precise moment he had fastened this very locket around her neck, her skin cool beneath his fingertips, the silver glinting against the soft hollow of her throat. He remembered the words he'd whispered, a promise of forever. A forever that had shattered into a million irreparable pieces. There was an inscription, once Finch said, his voice thick, drawing Elijah back to the present. On the inside, almost worn away now, I imagine. He didn't try to open it, as if afraid of what or who he might find, or rather not find inside. Elijah leaned forward slightly, his earlier unease now mingled with a burgeoning, almost painful empathy. "Sir, if this is too difficult." Finch raised a hand, silencing him. He took a ragged breath. "It belonged to someone I knew, a long time ago." He finally looked directly at Elijah, his eyes holding a raw vulnerability that was startling. Her name was Isabel. The name hung in the air, simple yet freighted with an unspoken history. She loved flowers. Finch continued, his gaze drifting back to the locket, as if Isabel herself were somehow contained within its tarnished shell, especially wildflowers. We used to walk in the fields near my family's old country estate. She said this pattern reminded her of the Queen Anne's lace that grew there. He paused, a deep sigh escaping him. The individual in question experienced an unforeseen cessation of our acquaintance. The stilted, overly formal phrasing was so at odds with the raw emotion in his eyes that Elijah almost didn't understand. Then it hit him. He meant Isabel was gone, disappeared or died. Elijah felt a knot form in his chest. This powerful, seemingly unbreachable man was unraveling before him, all because of a locket he, Elijah Hayes, had worn for years without a second thought. I'm very sorry, Mr. Finch," he said softly, the words feeling inadequate. Finch gave a wry, humorless twist of his lips. "Sorry, yes. So am I, Hayes. More than you can possibly imagine." He looked back at Elijah, a new intensity in his gaze, a desperate, searching quality. "This locket appearing now with you, it cannot be a coincidence. After all these years, it simply cannot." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Hayes, I need to understand how this came to be in your possession. Not just your mother or her mother. I need to know its journey. Every step, if possible." His eyes bored into Elijah's. "There are aspects of Isabel's departure that were never fully resolved, unanswered questions, loose ends that have haunted me for decades." Elijah felt a jolt. This was more than just reminiscing about a lost love. This was something darker, something unresolved. "Sir, I don't know much more than I told you," Elijah said honestly. "It's always just been in the family. No stories attached, not that I ever heard." But perhaps Finch pressed a spark of desperate hope in his eyes. Perhaps there are records, old letters, relatives who might remember something, anything about where your grandmother might have acquired it. He paused, then added the words, almost a plea. Elijah, I believe this locket might be the only key I have left to understanding what truly happened to Isabel, to finding some kind of peace. He looked at the young man before him, this boy who had walked into his life and usually detonated a carefully constructed wall around a 30-year-old wound. The request was enormous, unprofessional, perhaps even unfair. But Alistair Finch was beyond caring about professional decorum. He was a drowning man, and this boy, this locket, was the only piece of driftwood in a vast, merciless ocean of regret. "Will you help me?" Finch asked, his voice stripped of all pretense, raw and pleading. "Will you try to find out?" Elijah looked at the powerful CEO now, so utterly vulnerable, and then down at the dusty old locket still resting on the polished desk between them. He thought of his own quiet life, his mother's tired smile, his dreams of flight and engineering. He had fixed a $70 million jet. But this was a different kind of broken, and somehow, inexplicably, he felt a profound, unsettling pull to try and help mend it. The silence stretched, filled only by the distant hum of the city. The weight of Mr. Finch's raw plea settled heavily on Elijah's young shoulders. It was one thing to diagnose a faulty transducer in a multi-million-dollar jet. It was another entirely to navigate the labyrinth of a powerful man's 30-year-old grief. He was just a boy from the East Side, a mechanic, not a whatever it was Mr. Finch needed him to be. Yet looking at the torment etched so plainly on Alistair Finch's face, the sheer unadulterated pain that had momentarily stripped away the veneer of the unassailable CEO, Elijah found he couldn't refuse. There was a quiet integrity about Elijah, a sense of responsibility that ran deeper than his years. I can try, Sir Elijah, said his voice, soft but firm. I don't know what I'll find. My grandmother, she passed a few years back. My mum, she might remember something, but Grandma wasn't much for talking about the old days, especially the hard times. A flicker of something, gratitude, perhaps, or a desperate, fragile hope, softened Finch's harsh features. Anything, Hayes. Any fragment. This locket. It's like a ghost has walked back into my life. He pushed a card across the desk. My private number. And this he slid a thick envelope alongside it. For your time, your expenses? Elijah looked at the envelope, undoubtedly containing a substantial sum, and pushed it gently back. I don't need that, Mr. Finch. If I can help, I will. But not for money. Finch studied him for a long moment, a complex expression playing across his face. He slowly nodded, withdrawing the envelope. As you wish, Hayes. As you wish. That evening, Elijah spoke with his mother. Maria Hayes listened, her brow furrowed with concern, as Elijah recounted the strange events. The locket, she confirmed, had been her mother's, and her mother's before that, Elijah's great-grandmother. Grandma Clara always wore it, Maria said, her voice distant with memory. She was a stern woman, didn't suffer fools, came up from Louisiana during the Great Migration, said the locket was her only reminder of a kinder time before things got hard. She never said where it came from before her own mother, though. Just that it was precious and a little sad. A kind, sad locket. Not much to go on. Maria did, however, remember an old tin box of Clara's belongings, filled with yellowed papers and trinkets stored away in the attic. Maybe there's something in there, Hio. But be careful. Some doors are best left unopened. The next few days saw Elijah immersed in a new kind of diagnostic. The tin box, smelling faintly of dust and forgotten perfumes, yielded a trove of fragile letters, faded photographs of stern-faced ancestors, and a few pieces of costume jewelry. No immediate mention of a silver locket's acquisition. He meticulously sorted his mind, working with the same focused precision he applied to a complex engine, looking for patterns for anomalies. He even paid a visit to his great-aunt Millie, his grandmother Clara's younger sister, a woman whose memory was as sharp as her tongue, and whose apartment was a chaotic museum of a life lived fully, if somewhat eccentrically. "Alistair Finch, you say?" Aunt Millie had cackled, her bright eyes glinting behind thick spectacles, when Elijah, after much preamble, mentioned the name in connection with the locket. "The big-shot billionaire. What's he want with our Clara's old locket? Thinking it's got hidden diamonds, is he?" Elijah patiently explained, omitting the depth of Finch's distress, but outlining the query. "Isabel," Millie mused, tapping a long painted fingernail against her chin. Clara never spoke of no Isabel. But then Clara kept her secrets closer than her Sunday hat. "That locket, though. I do remember, Mama, that's your great-great-grandmother Eliza saying something once, about Clara getting it from a lady she worked for way back. A fancy white lady fell on hard times, had to sell her fineries. This was in New Orleans, before Clara came north. A fancy white lady who fell on hard times. It was a sliver, but it was something." Meanwhile, at Finch Global, the tremors from Alistair Finch's internal earthquake were beginning to register on the corporate Richter scale. Meetings were abruptly cancelled, decisions deferred. His legendary focus was shattered. One moment he'd be barking orders with his usual incisive clarity. The next, his gaze would drift his mind clearly, miles or rather decades away. Miss Albright, his PA, navigated these turbulent waters with admirable calm, quietly rescheduling and deflecting, though her own well-groomed eyebrows were often raised in concern. There were whispers, too. A rival board member, a man named Garrett Sloane, who had long coveted Finch's throne, was seen making quiet inquiries, his smile a little too predatory. The scent of vulnerability was in the air, and sharks were beginning to circle. Elijah, unaware of these corporate maneuverings, continued his quiet search. The detail from Aunt Millie about New Orleans and a fancy white lady was a new thread. He cross-referenced dates from old letters in Clara's box with the rough time frame Finch had implied for Isabel. He spent hours in the local library's digital archives, a skill honed from researching obscure mechanical parts, now applied to genealogical records and old city directories. He felt like a detective tracing a cold case, sometimes muttering to himself, "Okay, if the locket was sold in New Orleans around 1958, and Isabel vanished around 1957 in New York, how does it connect?" He almost expected to find a faulty circuit diagram explaining the leap. Then, tucked inside a tattered leather-bound Bible that had clearly belonged to his great-grandmother Eliza, he found it. Not a letter, not a diary. It was a small, folded piece of brittle, yellowed paper, a playbill, for a little-known off-Broadway production of The Glass Menagerie in New York. Dated spring 1957. On the back, in faded, elegant cursive, was a hastily scribbled note. "Dearest Eliza, if anything happens, if he finds out, take this." It was hers. "Keep it safe. Don't let him have it. She loved you for your kindness. Go to your sister in Louisiana. Don't look back. I." The initial I was smudged but unmistakable. Isabel. Elijah's heart hammered against his ribs. If anything happens, if he finds out, who was he, and what did Isabel fear he would do? The note implied threat urgency, a desperate act to protect something or someone by entrusting this locket, her locket, to Eliza, his great-grandmother, who must have been Isabel's maid, her confidant. And the most chilling part, don't let him have it, was the him, Alistair Finch, or someone else, entirely someone connected to Isabel's disappearance, someone Finch himself might not even know the full truth about. The dusty old locket in his pocket suddenly felt 100 times heavier. The story it held was no longer just one of lost love and regret. It hinted at something far more sinister, a secret kept silent for over 60 years, a secret that was now beginning to unfurl its chilling tendrils right into Elijah Hayes's unassuming life. The forgotten past wasn't just forgotten, it felt like it had been deliberately and perhaps violently buried. And Elijah, with this fragile playbill in his hand, had just found the shovel. The fragile playbill with its desperate faded message felt like a burning coal in Elijah Hayes's pocket. He knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that he couldn't keep this from Alistair Finch. It wasn't his secret to hold not any more. He called Mr. Finch's private number, his heart thudding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. The CRO answered on the second ring, his voice sounding distant and frayed. Elijah, dispensing with pleasantries, stated his purpose with a quiet urgency. "Mr. Finch, it's Elijah Hayes. I found something. Something I think you need to see. It's about Isabel and the locket." An hour later, Elijah was back in the penthouse office. The opulent room felt different this time, charged with an almost unbearable tension. Mr. Finch wasn't by the window. He was seated behind his massive desk, but not in his usual commanding posture. He was slumped, his shoulders rounded his face, pale and drawn. He looked older, more vulnerable than Elijah had ever seen him. He didn't speak as Elijah entered, merely gestured towards the chair opposite him. Elijah sat his own unease, a palpable thing. He carefully took out the playbill, its creases softened with age, and slid it across the polished mahogany. "My great-grandmother Eliza worked for Isabel, sir, back in 1957. Isabel gave this to her, along with the locket." He paused, then read the damning, heartbreaking words aloud. "Dearest Eliza, if anything happens, if he finds out, take this. It was hers. Keep it safe. Don't let him have it. She loved you for your kindness. Go to your sister in Louisiana. Don't look back. I—" As Elijah read, Alistair Finch's face seemed to crumble. The carefully constructed walls, already weakened, now shattered completely. He stared at the playbill, then at the locket, which lay beside it, a mute testament to a lost life. A low sound, a guttural moan of pure anguish escaped his lips. He picked up the playbill, his hands shaking so violently the old paper rattled. "If he finds out," Finch whispered, his voice hoarse, "don't let him have it." His eyes, wide and haunted, met Elijah's. All these years, I thought. I blamed myself for not being strong enough, for not fighting harder. But I never knew the true extent of the danger she was in. He buried his face in his hands, his powerful frame racked with sobs that seemed to tear through him from a place of ancient, unhealed sorrow. Elijah sat in stunned silence, a reluctant witness to the utter disintegration of this formidable man. The silence in the room was broken only by Finch's ragged breathing and the distant, indifferent sounds of the city far below. Minutes passed. Finally, Finch raised his head. His face was a ruin streaked with tears, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with a despair so profound it was almost unwatchable. "My father." He said the words choked, almost unrecognizable. "It was always my father. Alistair Finch Sr. He was the he in that note." Elijah stared, speechless. My father Finch continued, his voice, gaining a bitter, broken strength, was a man carved from granite and ambition. He built this empire from nothing, but he ruled our family with an iron fist. He had plans for me, alliances he wished to forge through a suitable marriage, a dynasty he intended to secure. He gestured vaguely around the opulent office. All this? It was his vision, his obsession. His gaze drifted to the locket. And then I met Isabel. She was everything his world was not. A painter, free-spirited, vibrant, with a laugh that could melt glaciers and a heart that saw beauty in the simplest things. He smiled, a fleeting, painful flicker of a memory. She worked part-time at a small art gallery. Your great-grandmother Eliza was a cleaner there, sometimes helped Isabel in her small apartment. Isabel. She adored Eliza. Said she had the kindest eyes in New York. Finch's voice grew heavy. My father found out about us. He saw Isabel as an impediment, a distraction, unsuitable. He forbade me to see her. His fists clenched on the desk. I was young then, barely 22. I thought I was strong. I defied him. I told him I would marry Isabel, with or without his blessing. I gave her that locket. It had belonged to my mother, his first wife, the one he claimed to have loved before ambition consumed him. I gave it to Isabel as a promise of my love, my protection. He let out a harsh, self-mocking laugh. Protection. What a fool I was. The story poured out of him. Then a torrent of grief and guilt held back for over 3 decades. His father, enraged by Alistair's defiance, had taken matters into his own ruthless hands. He hadn't made overt threats that Alistair Jr. could fight. No, Alistair Sr. was more insidious. He had started to systematically destroy Isabel's life from the shadows. Her small job at the gallery vanished. Her landlord suddenly found reasons to evict her. Whispers and rumors began to follow her, tainting her reputation, isolating her. I tried to help Finch, choked out. I gave her money, tried to find her new lodgings. But everything I did, my father somehow undid, tightening the noose. He wanted to break her, to make her leave me, to make her disappear from my life. He looked at Elijah, his eyes pleading for some kind of understanding or perhaps absolution he knew he didn't deserve. Isabel never told me the full extent of the pressure of the fear. She was proud. She tried to shield me from it. She knew how much I loved my father, despite everything. She didn't want to be the cause of a permanent rift. The playbill note. If anything happens, if he finds out, she knew. She knew he was capable of anything. One day, Finch's voice dropped to a near whisper. She was just gone, vanished, her apartment empty. No note for me, just gone. He paused, swallowing hard. My father told me she'd left me, that she'd realized she didn't belong in my world, that she'd taken money he'd offered her to start a new life elsewhere. I wanted to believe him. It was easier than believing the alternative, that my defiance had put her in such danger. She had to flee for her life, or worse. He looked at the note from Isabel to Eliza. She didn't run with his money. She ran from him. She entrusted her most precious possession, my mother's locket, the symbol of my promise, to your great-grandmother, begging her to keep it safe from him. And she told Eliza to flee too. The full, horrifying weight of it crashed down on Alistair Finch. His father hadn't just driven Isabel away. He had hunted her, terrified her into abandoning everything, possibly even orchestrating her complete disappearance under the guise of her having left. And he, Alistair Jr., had been a naive pawn, too blind or too weak to see the truth, too quick to believe his father's lies, because the alternative was too monstrous to contemplate. He had mourned a lost love, yes, but he had never understood the true, violent depth of the betrayal, the terror Isabel must have endured. He slumped forward, his head in his hands, the facade of the powerful CEO utterly obliterated, leaving only a broken, guilt-ridden old man. I failed her. He wept, the words muffled. I failed to protect her. I believed his lies. I let him win. And she suffered alone. Elijah watched his own emotions, a turbulent sea of shock pity, and a dawning, terrible understanding. The dusty old locket wasn't just a memento of lost love. It was a symbol of fear, of a desperate flight for safety, a silent accusation held for decades. The $70 million jet he had fixed seemed a triviality, now a child's toy compared to the wreckage of this man's soul. The room was filled with the sound of Alistair Finch's grief. The city outside continued its ceaseless, uncaring hum. Elijah Hayes, the boy who fixed things, felt a profound sense of helplessness. Some things he realized, once broken, could never truly be mended. The silence that followed Finch's confession was heavier than any Elijah had ever experienced. It was a silence filled with ghosts, with unspoken accusations, with the crushing weight of decades of deceit. Finally, Mr. Finch lifted his tear-ravaged face. He looked at Elijah not as a boss to an employee, but as one human being to another stripped bare. What do I do now, Hayes? He whispered, the question hanging between them, a fragile, terrifying admission of his own utter desolation. After all this, what can anyone possibly do? The power in the room had irrevocably shifted. The boy who owned nothing but a dusty old locket now held the key to a past that could destroy or perhaps begin to heal one of the world's most powerful men, and neither of them knew which way the lock would turn. The silence that descended upon Alistair Finch's opulent office was a living entity, thick with the ghosts of unspoken words and unexpiated sins. Elijah Hayes sat a young man adrift in an ocean of adult grief, watching the titan of industry weep like a lost child. The sobs eventually subsided, replaced by a ragged, exhausted breathing that seemed to draw all the oxygen from the room. Mr. Finch remained, slumped, his face buried in his hands, the picture of utter desolation. Elijah, after what felt like an eternity, quietly rose and poured a glass of water from the crystal decanter on a nearby console. He placed it gently on the vast mahogany desk near Finch's trembling elbow. A small, inadequate gesture in the face of such monumental pain, yet it was all he could offer. Finch didn't acknowledge it at first. He seemed lost, submerged in a private hell, decades in the making. The playbill with Isabel's desperate, faded plea lay between them like a judgment. All these years, Finch finally whispered, his voice raw, his face still hidden. I built this empire, on a foundation of lies. My father's lies. My own willful blindness. He lifted his head slowly, his eyes red, swollen, but now holding a dawning, agonizing clarity. I told myself she left me. It was cleaner, less culpable for me. I let my ambition, my desire to please a father who was impossible to please, overshadow everything. Isabel. She was the only pure, true thing in my life, and I let him extinguish her light. He looked at Elijah, then a deep, searching gaze. Your great-grandmother, Eliza. Isabel trusted her. She saw kindness in her, a kindness I, in my youthful arrogance and fear, failed to offer Isabel when she needed it most. He gestured vaguely. That locket. It should have been a symbol of my protection. Instead, it became a marker of my failure. A secret she had to protect from my world. Elijah listened, his own heart aching with a complex mix of emotions. There was pity for this broken man. Yes, but also a young man's outrage at the injustice Isabel and Eliza had faced. His own family unknowingly had carried a piece of this tragedy for generations. The dusty old locket wasn't just a keepsake, it was a burden, a silent witness. "What did your father do?" Sir Elijah asked quietly, not out of morbid curiosity, but because the question seemed to hang there, unanswered, crucial. "After Isabel." Fled Finch's face tightened. He was thorough. He ensured there were no loose ends that could embarrass the family or derail his plans for me. He had resources, influence. He made it seem as if she had simply vanished into thin air, a flighty artist who couldn't handle the pressures of a serious relationship. Any inquiries I tried to make in those early years were, gently but firmly, redirected or met with dead ends. He made me believe I was chasing a ghost of my own making. He closed his eyes briefly, and eventually I stopped chasing. I let the grief harden into a scar, and then I built walls around that scar. The weight of this knowledge settled upon Elijah. He thought of his own mother, working tirelessly of the quiet dignity with which his family had always faced their own struggles. And here was a man who had everything the world could offer, yet was impoverished in ways Elijah was only just beginning to understand. "This is a lot," Sir Elijah said, the understatement vast. He had to decide his own role now. He wasn't just the kid who fixed the jet. He was the keeper of a truth that had shattered this man. What did Finch expect of him? What did he expect of himself? He could walk away. Finch had his locket, his devastating truth. Elijah's part technically was done. But looking at Finch, stripped of all his power, all his pretense, Elijah saw not a billionaire boss, but simply a man consumed by a lifetime of regret. A man who at the end of his anguished confession had asked, "What do I do now?" You asked what you can do. "Mr. Finch?" Elijah said, his voice gaining a quiet strength that surprised even himself. "The past. It's done. But Isabel's note. She asked Eliza to keep the locket safe. She didn't want him, your father, to have it. Maybe the first step is to honor her wishes, not just mourn what your father destroyed." Finch looked up, a flicker of something new in his eyes. Hope? Or just the desperate clutching at a lifeline? "Honor her wishes," he repeated. "She wanted it kept safe," Elijah said. And she mentioned Eliza's kindness. Maybe finding out what happened to Isabel truly happened, not just what your father wanted you to believe. Maybe that's a start. And Eliza, my great-grandmother. She carried that fear with her all the way to Louisiana. She protected that locket, that secret for Isabel. Alistair Finch was silent for a long time, the only sound the ticking of an ornate grandfather clock in the corner, each tick a reminder of lost seconds, lost years. He seemed to be wrestling with an internal demon, the habits of a lifetime of command, warring with this new, agonizing vulnerability. The choice before him was stark retreat back into the gilded cage of his success, allowing the past to fester or to step onto a far more difficult path, one that might lead to further pain, but also perhaps to a different kind of truth, a different kind of peace. Elijah watched him, saying nothing more. He had offered what little he could. The rest was up to Mr. Finch. Slowly, painfully, Alistair Finch seemed to come to a decision. A new resolve began to solidify in his gaze, overlaying the despair. It wasn't the harsh resolve of the CEO, but something quieter, deeper, steel forged in the fires of belated understanding. "You're right, Hayes," he said, his voice still rough but firmer now. "You are absolutely right." He picked up the locket, holding it with a new kind of reverence. "This isn't just a reminder of my failure. It's a testament to her courage and to Eliza's loyalty." He stood up, not with his usual imposing stature, but with the hesitant movements of a man testing new, unsteady ground. He walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling city, but Elijah knew he wasn't seeing it. He was seeing a past he now had to confront, truly confront for the first time. "My father is long dead," Finch said more to himself than to Elijah. "I cannot confront him, but I can confront his legacy, his lies." He turned back to face Elijah. "The first step. You said the first step." A plan, fragile but determined, began to form in his eyes. "I need to know everything. What happened to Isabel after she gave Eliza that locket? Did my father, did his reach extend even further than I knew? And Eliza's family, your family, they carried this burden, this secret, unknowingly. There are amends to be made. Not with money," he added quickly, remembering Elijah's earlier refusal, "but with truth, with acknowledgement." He walked back to his desk and pressed the intercom, his hand surprisingly steady. "Miss Albright," he said, his voice clear, though laced with an emotion she had never heard from him before. "Cancel my appointments for the remainder of the week, and get Marcus Thorne from legal up here immediately. And, Albright, locate the best private investigative firm in the country. Money is no object. I have a matter of extreme personal importance that requires immediate and discreet attention." He released the button and looked at Elijah. It was a small action, a series of routine commands to an assistant. But to both men in the room it felt monumental. It was the first concrete step on a long, uncertain road. A difficult choice had been made. Alistair Finch, the man who had everything, was finally going in search of the one thing he'd never truly possessed, the unvarnished truth of his own past, and perhaps a chance, however slim, at some form of redemption. Elijah Hayes, watching him, felt a shift within himself. The burden of knowledge was still there, but it was now tinged with a tentative, unexpected sense of hope. The months that followed the shattering revelations in Alistair Finch's office were a period of quiet, seismic shifts. True to his word, Finch had mobilized his considerable resources. The best private investigators money could buy delved into the cold, forgotten trails of Isabel Dubois' disappearance and Eliza Hayes's subsequent flight. The truth, when it finally emerged, was a tapestry woven with sorrow and resilience. Isabel, it turned out, had managed to escape Alistair Finch Sr.'s insidious reach, living a quiet, fearful life in a small, remote town under an assumed name. She had passed away from illness nearly 15 years prior, never knowing that Alistair Jr. had mourned her, never knowing the full extent of his father's treachery, until it was too late for her to feel safe. She had never remarried, never had children. Her life had been a testament to quiet survival, forever shadowed by the fear of discovery. Elijah's great-grandmother had indeed found refuge with her sister in Louisiana, carrying Isabel's locket and her secret with fierce protective loyalty until her own passing. For Alistair Finch, this knowledge was a double-edged sword. There was the profound grief of Isabel's lonely end, the confirmation of his father's cruelty, and the bitter taste of his own decades-lost opportunity to find her, to help her, had he only known where to look or dared to defy his father more concertedly. Yet there was also a strange, somber peace in finally knowing. The ghosts were no longer formless. They had names, dates, and narrative. And Alistair Finch began to act. He established the Isabel Dubois Foundation for the Arts, endowing it with a significant portion of his personal fortune to support struggling young artists, particularly women who showed exceptional promise but lacked opportunity. The kind of artists Isabel had been, the kind of support she had desperately needed. He made no grand public pronouncements about his father's sins, but within Finch Global, a quiet but decisive restructuring began. Ethical oversight was strengthened, and the last vestiges of Alistair Sr.'s more ruthless business philosophies were dismantled. Garrett Sloane, the ambitious board member who had tried to exploit Finch's earlier distraction, found his own underhanded dealings meticulously investigated and exposed, leading to his unceremonious ousting. Finch handled it, not with the brutal efficiency of his old self, but with a calm, irrefutable presentation of facts. Justice, he was learning, had a quieter, more potent strength than vengeance. For Elijah Hayes, life had also transformed. Mr. Finch had insisted on funding his education, not as a reward, but as an investment. Isabel believed in nurturing talent. Hayes Finch had said, his voice gruff with emotion. And your great-grandmother Eliza showed immense character. This is for them as much as it is for you. You've earned it not just for fixing a jet, but for having the courage to bring an old man the truth, however painful. Elijah was now enrolled in a prestigious aerospace engineering program, his brilliant mind finally given the fertile ground it needed to flourish. He still worked part-time by his own insistence at a specialist lab affiliated with Finch Global, his hands never losing their intuitive feel for mechanics, even as his mind soared through complex theories of propulsion and avionics. The oversized coveralls were replaced by university sweatshirts, but the dusty old locket remained a quiet presence beneath his shirt. He saw Mr. Finch periodically. Their meetings were no longer in the imposing penthouse office, but often in Finch's private study at his country estate, the very estate where Isabel had once walked the fields of Queen Anne's lace. The room was filled with books, and surprisingly a few of Isabel's newly recovered unsigned paintings, which Finch's investigators had managed to trace. They were vibrant, full of a life that had been cruelly curtailed. Their conversations were different now. Finch was more subdued, more reflective, the sharp edges of the CEO softened by a quiet sorrow, yet also by a newfound peace. Elijah, in turn, spoke with a growing confidence, his insights no longer confined to machinery, but extending to the complexities of human nature he had been forced to witness. One crisp autumn afternoon, about a year after the playbill's discovery, Elijah was visiting Finch at the estate. They were walking through the gardens, the leaves a riot of red and gold. "You're looking less like you're about to declare war on a faulty spreadsheet these days," Mr. Finch Elijah observed, a slight, respectful smile playing on his lips. Alistair Finch actually chuckled a dry, rusty sound, but genuine nonetheless. "Perhaps Hayes, or perhaps I've merely found a different kind of balance sheet to worry about. One where the profits and losses are measured in something other than dollars." He paused, looking out over the rolling hills. "My father built an empire. I hope I'm building something that might in some small way mend a part of the world he broke." He turned to Elijah, a rare warm light in his eyes. "Isabel would have liked you, Elijah. Your honesty, your quiet strength, your hands that can fix almost anything." "I wish I could have known her," Elijah said softly. "And my great-grandmother, Eliza, too. She must have been very brave." They both were, Finch affirmed. "Braver than I ever was. The locket. It still lay in Elijah's possession. He had offered it back to Finch once, thinking it belonged with him, with Isabel's memory. But Finch had refused. "No, Elijah," he'd said. "It came to you for a reason. It chose you to bring the truth to light. It's part of your story now, your legacy. A reminder that even the smallest, most overlooked things can hold immense power, immense history." And a reminder, he'd added his voice softer, that kindness like Eliza's can echo through generations. And so Elijah Hayes continued to wear the dusty old locket, not as a charm for good luck, but as a symbol of a forgotten past, finally acknowledged, of a painful truth faced of two families unknowingly bound by tragedy, and now by a fragile, emerging hope. It was a reminder that every life leaves a trace, every choice has a consequence, and that even the deepest wounds, while they may never fully disappear, can with courage and compassion begin to heal. The path ahead for both Elijah and Alistair Finch was not one of unblemished joy, but of an earned peace, a quiet understanding forged in the crucible of shared sorrow, and the slow, deliberate rebuilding of trust. A new dawn had broken, not erasing the shadows of the past, but illuminating a way forward, a way to honor all the legacies, the broken, the resilient, and the reclaimed. And at the heart of it all was a young man's skill, an old man's grief, and a dusty old locket that had against all odds unlocked not just a forgotten past, but the possibility of a mended future. And so a dusty old locket, once a silent witness to fear and heartbreak, became a key, unlocking not just a forgotten past, but a path towards a hard-earned peace. Isn't it remarkable how the smallest objects can carry the weight of entire lives, their echoes shaping our present in ways we might not always see? This journey of Elijah and Mr. Finch has certainly left us with much to ponder, and perhaps it resonated with you too. What part of Alistair Finch's difficult path towards making amends truly stuck with you? And do you believe true peace can ever fully be found after such profound regret? We'd love to read your thoughts and, indeed, any ideas you have on how we can make these stories even more meaningful for you. Your insights help us immensely. If their story of truth and unexpected connection touched your heart, please consider leaving a like and share it with anyone who might find a piece of their own story, or perhaps a flicker of hope reflected here. And to ensure you don't miss our future explorations of the human spirit and the complex paths to redemption, do subscribe and click the notification bell. Until next time, may you find courage in your own truths and warmth in the connections you forge.